A noise came from a recent grave, and the gravedigger freezes upon seeing. David Samuel Miller was cleaning his tools after another difficult day at the Oakwood Municipal Cemetery when he heard something that made his blood run cold. A muffled, rhythmic sound, as if someone was knocking on wood. It was almost 11 at night when the noises began to come from the grave he himself had helped close 3 days prior. The young woman down there was named Chloe Sterling, daughter of the most influential businesswoman in town. David stopped breathing for a few seconds, his hands trembling as he held the shovel he had just cleaned. "It can't be," he murmured to himself, feeling his legs go weak. The sound continued, each knock more desperate than the last. David knew that cemetery like the back of his hand. He had worked there for 22 years, ever since he lost his job at the textile factory. He could tell the difference between the sound of wind in the trees, creaking branches, even rats running between the headstones. But this was different. This was human. His mind went back 3 days, when the Sterling family arrived at the cemetery in a procession of imported cars. Mrs. Eleanor Sterling, the family matriarch, was hysterical, screaming at anyone who came near. Her husband, Mr. Arthur Sterling, looked like a ghost, staring into nothingness while the funeral home staff made their preparations. The doctor said it was her heart, Old Buck, the other gravedigger, had commented as they dug the grave. Young girl, only 20 years old. Such a sad thing. David remembered finding the family's haste strange. Usually wealthy people held long viewings, with expensive flowers and emotional speeches, but the Sterling family wanted to bury Chloe the same day. Mrs. Eleanor insisted it was a family tradition, that they couldn't wait. Now standing there in the darkness, David felt that something had been very wrong from the start. The knocking grew weaker for a moment, then came back with full force. David dropped the shovel and ran to the small shed where he kept the heavier tools. His hands were cold and sweaty as he grabbed the pickaxe and the hoe. If there really was someone alive down there, every second could be the difference between life and despair. The cemetery was plunged in a darkness that seemed to swallow even the moonlight. David turned on his flashlight and ran back to the recent grave. The earth was still loose. It hadn't had time to compact completely. That would make the work easier, but he knew digging a grave alone would take hours. "Chloe, Chloe, can you hear me?" he shouted, putting his ear close to the earth. The sounds stopped completely. David felt his heart race. Perhaps it was too late. Perhaps his mind was playing tricks. Perhaps it was just bang, bang, bang. 3 strong, clear knocks answered his call. David had never worked so fast in his life. The first swing of the hoe removed an amount of dirt that normally would have taken 3. His back ached. Sweat streamed down his face, mixing with tears he hadn't even realized were falling. Between swings, he shouted words of encouragement to whoever was down there. "Hold on, girl. I'm coming. Don't give up on me." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like, and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. The early hours were advancing when David finally heard the sound of his shovel hitting the coffin's wood. His arms felt like lead, but adrenaline kept him steady. Carefully he cleared all the dirt from the lid and looked for a way to open it without hurting whoever was inside even more. "Chloe, you okay in there?" he asked, tapping lightly on the wood. A weak voice, almost a whisper, answered from inside the coffin. Get me out of here." David felt the tears well up in his eyes again. She was alive. After 3 days buried, Chloe Sterling was alive. He managed to pry open the lid, and the sight that met him would haunt him for the rest of his life. Chloe was as pale as paper, her lips purple, her hair matted with sweat against her face. Her fingernails were broken and bloody from scratching at the coffin walls. Her eyes, when she managed to open them, reflected a terror David had never seen in any human being. Easy now, he said, taking off his jacket and covering the girl's fragile body. "You're safe now. I'm taking you to the hospital." Chloe tried to speak, but only a groan escaped her throat. David carefully lifted her in his arms. She weighed almost nothing. He climbed out of the grave with difficulty, his muscles protesting the effort, but he was determined to save the life fate had placed in his hands. Riverside General Hospital operated 24 hours a day, but at that hour of the early morning it was nearly empty. David rushed through the emergency room doors, carrying Chloe in his arms. "Help! Help! She was buried alive!" he shouted to the nurses on duty. The response was immediate. 2 doctors ran to attend to them, followed by a nurse David recognized as Martha, a woman in her 50s who lived in the same district as him. "Buried alive? What do you mean?" asked Dr. Christopher, a young man David had never seen before. "She was buried 3 days ago at Oakwood Municipal Cemetery. I'm a gravedigger there. I heard her knocking on the coffin lid and dug until I got her out." The doctors exchanged a look that mixed shock and disbelief. David understood their reaction. If someone told him this story, he'd also find it hard to believe. "What's her name?" asked Nurse Martha as she prepared an IV. "Chloe Sterling, daughter of Mrs. Eleanor Sterling." The name caused a strange silence among the medical staff. Everyone in town knew the Sterling family and their influential power. Nurse Martha looked at David with a worried expression. "David, are you sure about what you're saying? The Sterlings buried their daughter 3 days ago. I saw it myself in the local paper." "Martha, I was there when they buried her, and I was there today when she called for help. Look at her, for God's sake. She's alive." Chloe was being connected to the monitoring equipment. Her pulse was weak but steady. Her breathing, though labored, showed her lungs were working. The doctors began to grasp the gravity of the situation. "We'll need to call the family," said Dr. Christopher, "and we'll also have to report this case to the authorities. This is highly unusual." David nodded, but a worry grew in his chest. How would the Sterling family react upon learning their daughter was alive? And more importantly, why had she been declared dead 3 days earlier? While he waited, David called his wife Margaret, quickly explaining the situation. She was in shock, but promised to come to the hospital as soon as she could arrange for someone to look after their young granddaughter who lived with them. "David, this is going to cause trouble," she said over the phone. "Rich families don't like it when poor folks meddle in their business. Margaret, the girl was alive down there. I couldn't just let her die for real." An hour later, the hospital was in an uproar. Mrs. Eleanor Sterling arrived accompanied by 2 men in suits who David assumed were lawyers. Behind them came a younger woman who looked very much like Chloe. It must be Hannah, the younger sister. "Where is she? Where is my daughter?" shouted Mrs. Eleanor as she entered the emergency room. Dr. Christopher led her to the bed where Chloe was admitted. The mother's reaction was a mix of relief, shock, and something David couldn't quite identify. It seemed like fear. "Chloe, my daughter, how did this happen?" cried Mrs. Eleanor, holding the young woman's hand. Chloe opened her eyes slowly. Her voice was still weak, but she managed to whisper, "Mother, I could hear everything." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Hannah, the younger sister, was the first to break the awkwardness. "Chloe, do you remember anything about what happened before?" Chloe closed her eyes as if making an effort to remember. "I was driving, coming from college. Then everything went dark. I woke up in the—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood. She had woken up in the coffin. One of the men in suits approached David. "Are you the gravedigger who found her?" "Yes, sir, I am." "Mr. Hawthorne," said the man, extending his hand. "The family's attorney. I need to speak with you about some details of the case." David didn't like the attorney's formal tone. He had a feeling they wanted to turn his heroic act into some kind of legal problem. "What kind of details?" he asked, suspicious. "Well, you understand this situation is very delicate for the family. There was a serious medical error, and that could cause problems for a lot of people. We would like to maintain discretion regarding the case." "Discretion?" David raised his voice. "The girl was buried alive for 3 days, and you want discretion?" Mrs. Eleanor approached them, leaving Chloe in Hannah's care. "Mr. David, it's not that. We are very grateful for what you did. You saved my daughter's life. But you understand this could become a very ugly scandal if it gets in the papers." David looked at Mrs. Eleanor and saw a woman different from the image he had always had of her. She seemed nervous, almost desperate. It wasn't just relief at having her daughter alive. It was something more complicated. Mrs. Eleanor, with all due respect, but your daughter went through a suffering no one deserves. The doctor who declared her dead made a grave error. Other families could go through the same situation. And that is exactly why we are going to sue the hospital, interrupted Mr. Hawthorne. But discreetly, without fanfare. You will be very well compensated for your heroism, rest assured. The word compensated sounded like a bribe to David. He began to understand that the family didn't just want to avoid scandal, but also to control him. I don't want any compensation. I only did my duty as a Christian. Hannah, who had overheard the conversation, approached the group. Mother, Mr. David saved Chloe. We should be thanking him, not trying to silence him. Hannah, you don't understand these things, scolded Mrs. Eleanor. I do understand. I understand that you're afraid of something, and it's not just the scandal. David realized Hannah was different from the rest of the family. Younger, maybe around 25, she seemed genuinely concerned for her sister and outraged by the other's attitude. Dr. Christopher joined the group. Family, I need to speak about the patient's condition. Chloe has been through severe physical and psychological trauma. She will need specialized care for a long time. What kind of care? Asked Mrs. Eleanor. Psychological, mainly. Spending 3 days conscious in a coffin is an experience that can cause permanent after-effects. She is developing acute claustrophobia and may have severe anxiety attacks. David felt his heart tighten. Chloe hadn't just survived the medical error, she would carry the scars for the rest of her life. And about the medical error itself? Asked Mr. Hawthorne. Who was responsible for the initial diagnosis? Dr. Christopher hesitated before answering. Dr. Victor Vance. He is no longer working here at the hospital. What do you mean he's no longer working? David interjected into the conversation. He requested a transfer to another hospital 2 days after the incident with Miss Chloe. The information left everyone in silence. David began to suspect there was more to this story than he had initially imagined. Why would a doctor request a transfer right after a case like this? Where is he working now? Insisted David. I cannot provide that information, replied Dr. Christopher, but I assure you the case will be investigated internally. Mrs. Eleanor and Mr. Hawthorne exchanged meaningful glances. David got the impression they knew more about Dr. Victor Vance than they were letting on. Chloe called for Hannah in a weak voice. The younger sister approached the bed. Hannah, I remember the doctor. He smelled of alcohol. The comment landed like a bomb in the group. Dr. Christopher immediately noted the information on the chart. Chloe, are you sure about this? Asked the doctor. Yes, it was the last thing I felt before fainting. David felt a growing anger in his chest. If the doctor was intoxicated during the treatment, the case was even more serious than he had thought. Dr. Christopher, said David, how many other patients did this Dr. Victor treat on the day Chloe was admitted? I cannot disclose that information to anyone who is not family. Then let me speak as family, said Hannah, surprising everyone. Chloe is my sister, and I want to know how many other patients might have gone through the same problem. Dr. Christopher looked at Mrs. Eleanor, waiting for some kind of guidance. The businesswoman was visibly irritated by her younger daughter's attitude. Hannah, you don't need to worry about this. Our lawyers will handle everything. Mother, this isn't about lawyers. It's about other families who may have lost loved ones because of an irresponsible doctor. David saw in Hannah an unexpected ally. The young woman had a social conscience and was not willing to accept the case being swept under the rug just to protect the family's image. Dr. Christopher, insisted Hannah, my sister almost went through a terrible experience due to medical negligence. If other patients face the same risk, they have a right to know. The doctor sighed, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. I will check the records and speak with the hospital administration, but I can say that Dr. Victor was working in the emergency room that night and had contact with at least 6 other patients. The information left David alarmed. 6 other patients seen by a possibly intoxicated doctor on the same night. Chloe was erroneously declared deceased. And where are those patients now? He asked. That I truly cannot disclose without authorization from the hospital administration and the families involved. Mrs. Eleanor approached David with an expression mixing gratitude and concern. Mr. David, you saved my daughter's life, and our family will be eternally grateful. But I ask you to understand our position. We are a well-known family in the city. We have a company that employs many people. A scandal like this could harm not only us, but also our employees. Mrs. Eleanor, I respect your position, but I also have my conscience. If this doctor did the same thing to other patients, I cannot stay silent. And you don't have to, said Hannah. We can investigate all of this without turning it into a circus. But we also can't pretend it didn't happen. Mr. Hawthorne, the lawyer, seemed increasingly impatient with the direction the conversation was taking. Mrs. Eleanor, perhaps it would be best to continue this discussion in a more private setting. No, said Chloe with a stronger voice than before. I want Mr. David to stay here. It was the first time Chloe had addressed David directly. He approached the bed, touched by the trust the young woman showed in him. I'm here, Chloe. How are you feeling? Scared, she admitted. But I'm grateful. You saved me. No need to thank me, my dear. Anyone would have done the same. No, not anyone. Chloe looked meaningfully at her mother and the lawyers. Some people prefer to hide things. Chloe's comment created an awkward silence. David realized there were tensions within the Sterling family that went beyond the current medical situation. Hannah held her sister's hand. Chloe, you're safe now. No one is going to hide anything. We're going to find out the truth about everything that happened. Hannah, you have no authority to speak for the family, reprimanded Mrs. Eleanor. And you have no authority to decide Chloe's life without consulting her, her younger daughter shot back. David watched the family confrontation with growing discomfort. He began to understand he had saved Chloe not just from a medical error, but also from a family that didn't seem to have her best interests at heart. Dr. Christopher returned to the group with some papers in hand. I've received authorization to disclose basic information about the other patients treated by Dr. Victor Vance that night. Of the 6 cases, 2 were transferred to other hospitals the next day. 1 was discharged the same day. 3 remained hospitalized here longer. And how are those 3 who were hospitalized? Asked Hannah. 2 were discharged later. The 3rd... Dr. Christopher hesitated. What happened to the 3rd? Insisted David. The 3rd patient didn't make it. He was a 72-year-old gentleman admitted with cardiac symptoms. The information struck the group like a thunderbolt. David felt his stomach turn. Doctor, are you saying this patient might have been declared deceased when he was still alive, like Chloe? I can't confirm that, but I will request a full investigation of all cases handled by Dr. Victor Vance during that shift. Chloe began to cry softly. The possibility that someone else had gone through the same suffering as her, but without the luck of being heard, devastated her. Chloe, don't blame yourself for this, said David, moving closer to her. You're not at fault for anything. The fault lies with whoever was negligent. But if he was alive, like I was, sobbed Chloe. Hannah hugged her sister, also emotional. We are going to find out the truth, Chloe, and if this really happened, his family will know, and there will be justice. Mrs. Eleanor was visibly disturbed by the direction of the conversation. Dr. Christopher, my daughter needs rest. She just went through a terrible trauma and shouldn't be dealing with these matters right now. You're right, the doctor agreed. Chloe needs peace and quiet to recover. No, said Chloe, with surprising determination. I want to know if other people went through what I went through. David admired the young woman's courage. Even after everything she had endured, she was worried about other potential victims. Chloe, he said, if you want to find out the truth, I'll help you, but only if you really want to. Don't feel obligated. I want to, she affirmed. I can't let this go. Mr. Hawthorne, the lawyer, intervened again. Chloe, any investigation should be conducted through the proper legal channels. It's not advisable for you to investigate on your own. Why? Asked Hannah. Can't we talk to the other patients' families? You can, but it could jeopardize any potential legal proceedings. There are correct ways to handle these situations. David was suspicious of the lawyer's intentions. It seemed he wanted to control the entire situation, steering it toward the Sterling family's interests, rather than seeking the truth. "Mr. Hawthorne," said David, "with all due respect, but if you want to sue the hospital, that's the family's right. But I also have the right to tell what I saw to whomever I want." "Of course, Mr. David. No one is questioning your rights, just suggesting that there be coordination between actions so they are more effective." David was not convinced. He decided he needed to investigate the case on his own, with or without the Sterling family's approval. The nurse, Martha, approached the group. "Everyone, Chloe needs to rest now. Visiting hours ended a long time ago. I can only allow one person to stay overnight." "I'll stay," said Hannah immediately. "Hannah, you have class tomorrow," said Mrs. Eleanor. "I'll stay with Chloe. Mom, I won't be able to focus in class thinking of Chloe here alone, and besides, I think she'll be more at ease with me." Chloe nodded weakly, agreeing with Hannah. "All right," conceded Mrs. Eleanor, "but I want you to call me if there's any problem." David prepared to leave, but Chloe called to him. "Mr. David, could you come back tomorrow?" "Of course, Chloe. If you want, I'll come back." "I do. Thank you. Thank you for listening to me." Chloe's words touched David deeply. For listening to me had a very literal and very symbolic meaning at the same time. He had not only physically heard her knocking from the coffin, but he was also listening to her concerns about other patients. "Don't worry, dear. Tomorrow I'll come back and we'll talk more." David left the hospital with the feeling that his life had completely changed that night. He was no longer just a gravedigger doing his job. Now he was the man who had saved Chloe Sterling and who might be able to help other families discover the truth about Dr. Victor Vance. The journey back home was long and quiet. David lived in a working-class neighborhood, about 40 minutes from the hospital. He caught the early morning bus, watching the city wake up as he processed everything that had happened. Margaret was waiting for him at the door, her eyes red from exhaustion and worry. "David, my love, tell me everything. I couldn't sleep a wink." He told the whole story from the moment he heard the knocking in the grave to the conversation at the hospital. Margaret listened in silence, interrupting only to ask specific questions. "And now? What are you going to do?" she asked when he finished. "I don't know yet. But I can't pretend I didn't see anything. If this doctor did this to other patients, there are families who might be suffering without knowing the truth. David, be careful. Rich families are dangerous when they feel threatened, and you don't have money to fight with expensive lawyers. Margaret, I'm not going to fight anyone. I just want the truth to come out." Margaret had known her husband for over 20 years. She knew that when he became convinced something was right, there was no force in the world that could change his mind. "Then count on me. If you think it's right, I support you." David slept only a few hours, but with a clear conscience. When he woke up, he had already decided what to do. First, he would return to the hospital to visit Chloe, as he had promised. Then, he would try to find out more information about Dr. Victor Vance and the other patients he had treated that night. At the hospital, he found Chloe awake and a little better. Hannah also looked rested, despite having spent the night there. "How are you feeling today?" asked David. "Better," replied Chloe. "I'm still afraid of enclosed spaces, but I'm better." "And have you remembered anything else about that night?" Chloe closed her eyes, straining to recover the memories. "I remember the doctor took a very long time to examine me. I was awake, but I couldn't move or speak. I heard him talking to someone about having to finish quickly because he had an appointment." "What kind of appointment?" asked Hannah. "I don't know, but he was nervous, impatient." David made a mental note of this information. A nervous, hurried doctor could explain the wrong diagnosis. "Chloe, would you mind if I tried to find out more about the other patients who were treated that night?" "No. On the contrary. I want to help however I can." Dr. Christopher arrived to do Chloe's morning evaluation. He brought news about the hospital's internal investigation. "Chloe, we got more information on Dr. Victor Vance. He's working at a hospital in New York City now, but the transfer has been temporarily suspended due to our investigation." "What does that mean?" asked Hannah. "That he can't take up the new post until the case is cleared up, and we also managed to contact the families of the other patients treated that night. David was encouraged by the news. And what did they say? 2 families agreed to cooperate with the investigation. 1 family doesn't want to get involved, and the family of the gentleman who didn't make it, well, they want a new investigation into the case. The information confirmed David's suspicions. If the family wanted a new investigation, it was because they also doubted the circumstances of their relative's situation. "Doctor," said David, "would it be possible for me to talk to these families? I can't facilitate that contact due to medical privacy issues, but if they want to speak with you, there's no legal impediment." David understood he would have to find another way to reach these families. Hannah offered to help. "Mr. David, I can try to find out who these families are. My mother knows a lot of people in town, and information like that gets around." "You would do that?" "I would. Chloe is my sister, and if other people went through the same thing, I want them to know the truth." Chloe held Hannah's hand. "Thank you for supporting me in this." "Always, Chloe. Always." David left the hospital with a feeling of hope. With Hannah as an ally, and the official investigation underway, perhaps he could uncover the whole truth about Dr. Victor Vance. At the cemetery, his co-workers welcomed him as a hero. The news that he had saved a person buried alive had spread quickly among the staff. "David, man, you've become a legend," said Old Buck. "No one's going to forget this story." "I just did what anyone would do," replied David modestly. "No, they wouldn't. A lot of people would have been scared or would have thought it was all in their head." David spent the day working, but his mind was focused on Chloe's case. In the afternoon, he received an unexpected call. "Hello." "Mr. David, it's Hannah Sterling." "Hi, Hannah. Did something happen to Chloe?" "No, she's fine, but I got some important information. I found out who the family of the gentleman who didn't make it that night is." David felt his heart race. "Who is it?" "The Thompson family. Mr. Henry Thompson, 72 years old. He lived in the St. Jude district. His family really wants to talk to you." "Do they know about Chloe?" "They do, and they suspect the same thing that happened to her might have happened to their Henry." David wrote down the address and prepared to make a visit that could completely change his understanding of the case. The Thompson family's house was simple, but well kept. Mrs. Alice Thompson, Henry's widow, received him with tears in her eyes. "Mr. David, thank you for coming. Ever since I heard about the Sterling girl, I can't stop thinking about my Henry." "Mrs. Alice, tell me what happened that night." "My husband started feeling sick during dinner. Chest pain, shortness of breath. We took him to the hospital, and the doctor said it was a heart attack. Henry was admitted, but the next day the doctor said he hadn't made it." "Did you see your husband after he was declared deceased?" "I did. He was in the hospital morgue, but—" Mrs. Alice hesitated. "What is it, Mrs. Alice?" "I thought he was still a bit warm. I mentioned that to my daughter, but she said it was just my impression that I was too shaken up." David felt a chill down his spine. If Mr. Henry was still warm when Mrs. Alice saw him, it could be a sign that the body's cooling process hadn't fully begun. "Mrs. Alice, do you remember the doctor's name?" "Yes, I do." "Dr. Victor Vance. A young man, seemed nervous. He barely looked at us when he spoke." The confirmation that it was the same doctor made David certain that her Henry had also been a victim of medical error. "Does your family want to do something about this?" "Yes, we do. My Henry was a strong, hard-working man. If he was alive and was buried—" Mrs. Alice couldn't finish the sentence. David hugged the woman, offering what comfort he could. "We'll find out the truth, Mrs. Alice. Your Henry deserves justice." Mrs. Alice's daughter, Sarah, arrived home at that moment. She was a woman of about 40, who worked as a secretary in an accounting office. "Mum, is this the gentleman who saved the girl from the Sterlings?" "That's me," replied David. "Mr. David, our family is very grateful for what you did, and we want to help however we can to find out if my father went through the same thing. Sarah, I'll be honest with you. I'm not sure of anything yet, but the circumstances are very similar, and it was the same doctor. What can we do? First, you can request a second medical opinion on your father's case, and you can also look for a lawyer to advise you about your rights." "We don't have money to pay for a lawyer," said Mrs. Alice. "There are lawyers who work for free on cases like this," explained David. "And there's also the public defender's office." Sarah wrote down David's instructions. "And you? What will you do now?" "I'll keep investigating. I want to find out if there are other similar cases." David left the Thompson family home with even more determination. Now he was almost certain that Dr. Victor Vance had committed at least 2 serious errors on the same night. The next day, he returned to the hospital to visit Chloe. She was visibly better, able to sit up in bed and talk for longer. "Mr. David, Hannah told me about the Thompson family. It makes me very sad, but it also makes me more certain that we're doing the right thing. Chloe, how are you feeling about all this?" "I have nightmares almost every night. I dream I'm in the coffin again, and I wake up in a cold sweat. But during the day, I feel I need to do something to help other people." David admired Chloe's strength. Despite all the trauma, she was channeling her experience into something positive. "And your mother? How is she reacting to all this?" Chloe sighed. "She's not happy. She wants me to forget everything and move on. Says that stirring all this up will only hurt me." "And you? What do you think?" "I think I can't pretend it didn't happen. And I can't pretend it might not be happening to other people." Hannah arrived at that moment bringing news. "Chloe, Mr. David, I got more information. I found out Dr. Victor Vance has had problems with alcohol before. A friend of mine who works at the hospital in New York City told me he was in a recovery program." "That explains a lot," said David. "It explains, but it doesn't justify," added Chloe. "If he knew he had problems, he shouldn't have been treating patients." "Exactly," agreed Hannah. "And there's more. I found out that on the night you were admitted, Chloe, there was a wedding reception at the City Club. Several doctors were there before going to work at the hospital. The information painted an even more worrying picture. Dr. Victor had possibly been drinking at the reception before starting his shift at the hospital. Hannah, did you get the names of the other doctors who were at the party?" "I got a few, and something interesting. Dr. Christopher, who's taking care of Chloe now, was also there. But he wasn't on call that night." David made a mental note to talk to Dr. Christopher about what he knew regarding Dr. Victor's condition that night. "Everyone," said Chloe. "I've made a decision. I want to speak personally with Mr. Henry's family. I think it might be important for them to hear from someone who went through the same thing." "Chloe, are you sure?" asked Hannah, worried. "I am. If I were in their place, I'd want to talk to someone who understands what happened." David was moved by Chloe's generosity. Despite her own trauma, she was willing to help other people. "If you're sure, I can arrange a meeting with Mrs. Alice Thompson." "Yes, I want to. But there's one thing I need to do first." "What?" "I want to go back to the cemetery. I want to see the grave where I was." The suggestion left David and Hannah silent. It was a courageous act, but potentially very difficult for Chloe. "Chloe, are you sure about this?" asked David. "I'm not sure about anything, but I feel I need to do this to be able to move forward." "What about the doctors? Do they think you're ready to leave the hospital?" Dr. Christopher said, "I can be discharged tomorrow if I want. I'll continue psychological follow-up as an outpatient." Hannah held her sister's hand. "If you want to do this, Chloe, I'll go with you, and I'm sure Mr. David will go too." "Of course I will," confirmed David. "But we'll do this at your pace, Chloe. If you feel unwell, we stop immediately." Agreed. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The next day, Chloe was discharged from the hospital. The first place she wanted to visit, surprisingly, was the cemetery. David arranged everything carefully, making sure the area was quiet and private. When Chloe saw the grave where she had been buried, her legs went weak. Hannah held her by the arm. "Do you want to sit for a bit?" asked Hannah. "No. I want to get close." Chloe slowly approached the grave. The earth was still turned over, clear marks from the urgent excavation David had done 3 days before. "This is where I screamed for help," she said, her voice choked. "This is where I thought I would stay forever." David approached. "And this is where you showed you're a fighter. You didn't give up, Chloe." I almost gave up several times. There were moments I thought about stopping banging on the wood, stopping screaming, but something told me to keep trying. Thank goodness you kept trying, said Hannah, also emotional. Chloe knelt beside the grave and placed her hand on the earth. Thank you, she said. Thank you for letting me get out of here. The moment was deeply moving for everyone present. David understood that Chloe was performing a kind of closing ritual with her traumatic experience. Now I want to meet Mrs. Alice Thompson, said Chloe, standing up and brushing the dirt from her hands. The visit to the Thompson family was touching. Mrs. Alice received Chloe as if she were a daughter, and Chloe offered the kind of comfort that only someone who had been through a similar experience could give. Mrs. Alice, said Chloe, I can't guarantee that what happened to me happened to your Henry. But I can guarantee that we'll do everything to find out the truth. My dear, just the fact that you're here alive already gives me hope that justice will be done. What was your Henry like? Asked Chloe. Mrs. Alice smiled for the first time since David had met her. My Henry was a good man. He worked 40 years at the same company, never missed a single day. He adored his grandchildren, always had a joke to tell. When he started feeling unwell that night, I knew it was serious because he never complained about anything. And at the hospital, how was he? Conscious when we arrived. He spoke to me, said he was scared. The doctor said they would take good care of him, that I shouldn't worry. Did you stay with him? I stayed until midnight, when the nurse said it was better for me to rest. Henry seemed calmer, he was already asleep. When I returned early in the morning, they told me he hadn't made it through the night. Chloe and David exchanged meaningful looks. The circumstances were very similar to Chloe's case. Mrs. Alice, said David, do you remember if your Henry was taking any medication that night? Yes, the doctor gave him an injection for the pain. After that, he became very drowsy. What kind of injection? I don't know, the doctor didn't explain. He just said it would help with the chest pain. Chloe held Mrs. Alice's hand. Mrs. Alice, if my Uncle Henry really went through what I went through, he didn't suffer alone, I promise you that. How can you promise that, dear? Because when I was down there, I felt as if someone was with me. I can't explain it well, but I didn't feel completely alone. Chloe's words brought visible comfort to Mrs. Alice. Regardless of each person's religious beliefs, the idea that Henry hadn't suffered alone offered some kind of peace. Sarah, Henry's daughter, arrived from work and joined the conversation. I got a lawyer who will work for free on Dad's case, she announced, and I also scheduled an appointment with another doctor to review the tests Dad had that night. That's great, said David. The more official information we can get, the better. And you? How is the hospital's investigation into Dr. Victor going? Asked Sarah. It's still ongoing, replied Chloe. But we learned he can't start the new job until everything is cleared up. And the other families? Did you manage to contact them? David told about the investigation's progress and about the collaboration of some families. The overall picture was becoming clearer. Dr. Victor Vance had committed multiple medical errors on the same night, possibly due to alcohol use. One thing worries me, said Chloe. If he had problems with alcohol, why didn't the hospital know? Or did they know and did nothing? That's a very important question, agreed David. Maybe we need to investigate more deeply what the hospital knew about Dr. Victor. Hannah, who had been quiet for much of the conversation, decided to share some information she had discovered. Everyone, talking to some people, I found out that Dr. Victor had been suspended from another hospital before coming to work here. Suspended for what? Asked Chloe. For suspicion of working under the influence of alcohol. But apparently he got a medical certificate saying he was cured, and that's how he got the job here. The information was alarming. If Dr. Victor had a history of alcohol problems while working, his hiring by the municipal hospital represented a serious negligence by the administration. Hannah, where did you get this information? Asked David. A friend of mine works in the Human Resources Department of a private hospital. He told me in confidence, but said I could use the information if necessary. This changes everything, said Chloe. If the hospital knew about his problems and still hired him, they have responsibility for what happened. Sarah wrote everything down carefully. I'll pass this information to the lawyer. This could be very important for Dad's case. David felt encouraged by the investigation's progress, but he also knew that uncovering the truth was only the first step. The next step would be to ensure justice was served and that situations like this would not be repeated. "Everyone," he said, "I think it's time we formalize this investigation. We can't keep doing everything informally." "How so?" asked Chloe. "I think we need to contact the proper authorities, the district attorney's office, the state medical ethics board, maybe even the press." "Not the press," Chloe said immediately. "At least not yet. My family doesn't want the exposure, and I respect that to a point." "I understand," said David. "But the other avenues are important. The state medical ethics board needs to know that Dr. Victor Vance may pose a risk to other patients." Everyone agreed it was time to take more official steps in the investigation. They arranged to meet again in 2 days to define their strategy. When David got home that night, he found Margaret waiting with a worried expression. "David, a man came by today looking for you." "What man?" "He said he was a lawyer for the Sterling family. He left a card and said it was very important you call him." David took the card. It was Mr. Hawthorne, the same lawyer he had met at the hospital. Did he say what he wanted? He didn't. But I didn't like the look of him, David. He seemed threatening. David decided to call the lawyer the next day. First, he wanted to talk to Chloe about this approach. At the hospital, he found Chloe doing physical therapy to regain the muscle strength she had lost during her days in the coffin. "Chloe, your family's lawyer came to my house yesterday. Do you know what he wanted?" Chloe stopped her exercises, clearly concerned. "I don't, but I can guess. My mother is getting more and more nervous about this investigation. She thinks it will harm the family's business." "And you? What do you think?" "I think my mother is putting business ahead of justice, and that makes me very sad." Hannah arrived at that moment bringing bad news. "Chloe, Mr. David, I need to tell you something. My mother hired a private detective to investigate you, Mr. David." The information alarmed David. "A private detective? Why would she do that? She wants to find something to discredit you, to undermine your version of events." "Hannah, this is serious," said Chloe. "She can't do that." "Yes, she can, Chloe. She has money and influence, and she's determined to protect the family's image, even if it means harming the person who saved you." David felt a mix of anger and disappointment. He had saved Chloe's life and was now being investigated as if he were a criminal. "Chloe, maybe it's better if I step back from this investigation. I don't want to cause problems for you with your family." "No," said Chloe firmly. "You're not stepping back from anything. If my mother wants to play detective, that's her problem. The truth will come out either way." Hannah hugged her sister. "Chloe, you're very brave. But what if Mom makes things difficult for us?" "Hannah, I was almost buried alive. After going through that, I'm not afraid of a fight with Mom." David admired Chloe's determination, but he also worried about the consequences. He knew wealthy families could be ruthless when they felt threatened. "Chloe, Hannah, maybe you should talk to your father about this. He seemed more reasonable when we met at the hospital." "Dad is traveling again," said Hannah, "but when he gets back, we will talk to him." Dr. Christopher appeared to talk with them. "Chloe, how are you adjusting to outpatient treatment?" "Well, doctor, I still have nightmares and anxiety attacks, but I'm coping better." "Great. And regarding the investigation into Dr. Vance, I have news." Everyone gathered around, anxious for information. The State Medical Ethics Board has decided to open a disciplinary proceeding against him, and the hospital is also being investigated for negligence in hiring. "That's good news," said David. "It is, but there's a complication. Dr. Victor Vance has hired lawyers and is denying all the accusations. He claims all his diagnoses were correct and that the mistakes were made by other people." "What do you mean?" asked Chloe, outraged. "He's saying you weren't actually dead when you were buried, but that you developed signs of life only afterward, due to external factors." Chloe turned pale at the information. "Is he saying I lied about everything?" "Not exactly, but he's questioning the timeline of events and suggesting there may have been contamination of the evidence. David felt anger rising in his chest. "Doctor, you were there when I brought Chloe to the hospital. You saw the state she was in." "I know, Mr. David, and my medical report confirms everything you said, but Dr. Vance has the right to defend himself, even if in a questionable manner." "And what about the case of Mr. Henry Thompson?" asked Chloe. "The family obtained authorization to exhume the body. They're going to run new tests to determine the real causes of his condition." The information brought hope to the group. If the new tests confirmed that Mr. Henry had also been a victim of medical error, it would strengthen the case against Dr. Vance. "When will the exhumation be?" asked David. "Next week. It's a delicate process, but a necessary one." Chloe held David's hand. "Mr. David, I want to be present at the exhumation. I think I owe it to Mr. Henry and his family." "Chloe, are you sure? It could be very difficult for you." "I'm sure if I manage to come out of my grave alive, I can face this." Chloe's courage continued to impress David. Despite all the trauma, she was determined to see justice done. That afternoon, David finally called Mr. Hawthorne, the Sterling family lawyer. "Mr. Hawthorne, this is David Miller. You came to my house yesterday." "Ah, Mr. David, thank you for returning my call. I really need to speak with you. Could it be today?" "Yes, but I want to make it clear that I won't do anything that harms Chloe or the investigation into Dr. Vance." "Of course, Mr. David. That's exactly what I want to talk about. Can we meet at my office?" David agreed. And an hour later, he was sitting in the lawyer's luxurious downtown office. "Mr. David, I'll be direct. The Sterling family is very grateful for what you did for Chloe. But they are also concerned about the direction this investigation is taking." "What direction?" "We just want to uncover the truth." "I understand. But the truth can be uncovered without creating a public scandal. We are preparing a very solid lawsuit against Dr. Vance and against the hospital. Chloe will be very well compensated for everything she's been through. So, the problem is that this parallel investigation you're conducting could harm our legal case. If information leaks incorrectly, we could lose our legal advantage." David began to understand where the lawyer was heading. "Mr. Hawthorne, are you asking me to stop investigating the case?" "Not exactly. We want you to coordinate your actions with us. That everything be done in an organized and strategic manner." "And if I don't agree?" Mr. Hawthorne hesitated before answering. "Mr. David, parallel investigations can be interpreted as interference with justice, and that could bring legal problems for you." The threat couldn't have been clearer. David stood up from his chair. "Mr. Hawthorne, thank you for the conversation. I'll think about what you said. Mr. David, it doesn't have to be this way. We can work together." "Maybe. But my way, not your way." David left the office certain that the Sterling family was more interested in controlling the situation than in seeking justice. This made him even more determined to continue the investigation. On his way home, he stopped by the Thompson family's house to tell them about the conversation with the lawyer. "Mrs. Alice, Marina's family is trying to control our investigation. They want us to stop looking for other victims of Dr. Victor." "Why would they do that?" asked Mrs. Alice. "Because they don't want a scandal. They want to handle everything behind the scenes without drawing attention." Sarah, who was present, was outraged. "That's not fair. If there are other families going through the same thing, they have a right to know." "Exactly," agreed David, "and that's why we're going to continue our investigation, regardless of what the Sterling family wants." "Mr. David, won't you get into trouble because of this?" "I might, Mrs. Alice, but I can't let fear stop me from doing what's right." Mrs. Alice hugged David. "May God protect you. You are an angel in our family's life." David left the Thompson house with renewed determination. He knew he would face obstacles, but he also knew he was doing the right thing. At home, he told Margaret everything. "David, they're going to make our lives difficult. Rich families don't play around." "Margaret, if they want to play games, we'll play too. But I won't let them silence the truth. Then you can count on me. If we have to fight, we fight together." Margaret's support strengthened David's resolve even more. He knew the coming days would be difficult, but he was prepared to face any challenge. The next morning, David received an unexpected call from Dr. Christopher. "Mr. David, I need to speak with you urgently. Can you come to the hospital?" Did something happen to Chloe? It's not about Chloe, it's about Dr. Victor. Some very serious information has come to light. David cancelled all his appointments and went straight to the hospital. Dr. Christopher was waiting for him with a stack of documents. Mr. David, we gained access to Dr. Victor's complete history, and we discovered some very concerning things. What kind of things? In the last 2 years, Dr. Victor was responsible for at least 8 cases of questionable diagnoses at different hospitals. Cases where patients were declared deceased or with serious illnesses without proper examinations. David felt his blood run cold. 8 cases, and no one investigated this before? Each case was at a different hospital in different cities. He moved whenever suspicions began to arise. And how many of those patients actually... Of the 8 cases, 3 were buried. The other 5 were cremated quickly at the family's request. The information horrified David. Dr. Victor wasn't just a negligent doctor, but possibly someone who systematically committed grave errors. Doctor, this needs to go to the district attorney's office immediately. We're already preparing all the documentation, but Mr. David, there's another problem. What? Dr. Victor has disappeared. He was supposed to appear today for another statement regarding Chloe's case, but he didn't show up, and no one can locate him. David understood the gravity of the situation. If Dr. Victor had fled, it could be because he knew the evidence against him was undeniable. What now? How are we going to find him? The authorities have already been alerted, but in the meantime we need to focus on helping the families we've already identified. David agreed, but one concern bothered him. Doctor, do you think Dr. Victor might try to harm the witnesses? We don't know, but we're going to recommend you all take extra security precautions. The recommendation alarmed David. He hadn't considered the possibility that Dr. Victor could pose a physical threat. Doctor, I need to warn Chloe and the other families about this. Yes, please, and keep in constant contact with us. David left the hospital with a sense of urgency. The investigation had become something much bigger and more dangerous than he had initially imagined. He found Chloe and Hannah at the family apartment. They were organizing documents related to the case. Chloe, I have very serious news about Dr. Vance. David told them about the doctor's history and about his disappearance. The 2 sisters were shocked. 8 cases? Repeated Chloe. How many people might have suffered because of him? We don't know yet. But now we understand it wasn't an isolated mistake. Dr. Vance has a pattern of behavior. Hannah stood up, agitated. This changes everything. We're no longer talking about a medical error. We're talking about something much more serious. Exactly, agreed David. And that's why we need to be even more careful. Dr. Vance has fled, and we don't know what he might try to do. Chloe turned pale. Do you think he might try something against us? We don't know, Chloe, but it's better we take precautions. Hannah hugged her sister. Chloe, maybe it's best if you stay at Grandma's house for a few days. You'll be safer there. I'm not going to hide, Hannah. If Dr. Vance did what you're saying, he needs to be stopped. And I won't let fear stop me from helping. David admired Chloe's courage, but he also worried about her safety. Chloe, courage is important, but so is prudence. At least until we know where Dr. Vance is, it would be good for you both to stay in safe places. All right. But I'm not stopping the investigation. No one is stopping, David assured her. We're just going to be more careful. That afternoon, David visited the Thompson family again to tell them about the new developments. Mrs. Alice was even more shaken to learn that her husband may have been the victim of a criminal pattern. Mr. David, could my Henry have been just one among many victims? Unfortunately, Mrs. Alice, it seems so, but that also means we have a better chance of proving what happened to him. Sarah, who had arrived from work, joined the conversation. I managed to schedule the exhumation for the day after tomorrow. The medical examiner will be present to do all the necessary tests. Great, said David. And about security? Have you taken any measures? My cousin, who's a police officer, is going to stay here at the house for a few days, just to be safe. David was relieved. At least the Thompson family was taking precautions. And Chloe, how is she? Asked Mrs. Alice. Okay, all things considered. She wants to be present at your Henry's exhumation." "She doesn't need to go through that," said Mrs. Alice. "She's already suffered enough." I said the same thing, but she insists she wants to help you. "She's a brave girl," commented Sarah. "My father would be proud to know someone like her is fighting for his justice." The conversation was interrupted by a loud knock at the door. Sarah went to answer it and returned with a worried expression. "Mom, Mr. David, there's a man outside asking about you. He said he's a journalist." David and Mrs. Alice exchanged glances. If the press was starting to take an interest in the case, things could get very complicated. "I'll talk to him," said David. The man at the door was young, about 30, with a recorder in his hand and a notepad. "Good afternoon, I'm Julian Reed, from the Metro Herald. I'm investigating reports of medical errors at Riverside General Hospital. I understand you were involved in a recent case." David hesitated. On one hand, media exposure could help pressure the authorities. On the other, it could put Chloe and other victims in an uncomfortable position. "What kind of information do you already have?" asked David. "I know a young woman from the Sterling family was buried alive and that you saved her. I also know there are suspicions about the doctor in charge." "But I need more details to publish the story," David thought quickly. If the story was going to come out anyway, it was better that it be with correct information. "Arthur, I can talk to you about the case, but with some conditions." "What conditions?" "First, no sensationalism. Second, total protection of the identity of any victims who don't want to be exposed. Third, focus on the issue of patient safety, not on morbid details." Arthur agreed to the conditions, and David told a summarized version of the story, omitting details that could identify Chloe without her authorization. "Mr. David, this is much more serious than I imagined. How many other victims could there be?" "We don't know yet, but we're investigating." "And the authorities? What are they doing?" "The State Medical Ethics Board has opened a disciplinary process. The district attorney's office is investigating, and the hospital is also being reviewed." Arthur noted everything down carefully. "Can I publish this story?" "You can, but remember the conditions we agreed on." "Agreed. The story runs tomorrow." David said goodbye to the journalist with mixed feelings. The press exposure could help, but it could also bring unexpected complications. Back at the Thompson house, he told them about the conversation with the journalist. "Do you think it was right to talk to him?" he asked. "I think so," Sarah replied. "If more families are going through the same thing, they need to know they're not alone." "And it could pressure the authorities to act faster," Mrs. Alice added. David agreed, but decided to warn Chloe about the story before it was published. At the Sterling apartment, he found Chloe more dejected than in previous days. "How are you, Chloe?" "Tired," she admitted. "Physically I'm better, but emotionally, it's hard." "It's normal to feel that way. You went through a very traumatic experience." "It's not just that, Mr. David. It's knowing that other people went through the same thing. It's knowing that my family is more worried about appearances than about me. It's knowing that this Dr. Victor might be out there free." David sat down next to Chloe. "Chloe, you don't have to carry the weight of all this alone. But I feel responsible. If I hadn't survived, no one would know what Dr. Victor was doing. And that's exactly why you survived, so the truth could come out." Hannah arrived at that moment with news about their mother. "Chloe, Mom scheduled a meeting with all the lawyers tomorrow. She wants to define a strategy for the case." "What kind of strategy?" asked Chloe. "I don't know, but from her tone it's not going to be something we'll like." David told them both about the conversation with the journalist. "A story in the newspaper?" Chloe was worried. "He promised not to identify you without your authorization." "But Chloe, maybe it's important for you to consider the possibility of speaking publicly about the case." "Why?" "Because your voice has power. You are the living proof that Dr. Victor made serious mistakes. Without your public testimony, it might be harder to get justice." Chloe reflected on the suggestion. "If I speak publicly, my mother will be furious." "But it might be the right thing to do," said Hannah. "Chloe, you're 20 years old. You don't need Mum's authorization to do what you think is right." "Yeah, maybe you're right." David saw that Chloe was seriously considering the possibility of going public. It was a courageous decision, but one that could have significant consequences. Chloe, if you decide to speak publicly, I will support you, but think carefully before making that decision. I'll think about it, Mr. David, but one thing I've already decided: I will be present at Henry's exhumation tomorrow. Are you sure? I am. It's the least I can do for him and his family. David was moved by Chloe's determination to help other victims, even while dealing with her own trauma. The next day, the newspaper article was published on the front page. The headline was discreet, but impactful. Medical error at Riverside General Hospital may have victimized multiple patients. The reaction was immediate. Several people called the newspaper, reporting suspicious cases involving Dr. Victor Vance at other hospitals. David's phone didn't stop ringing with families wanting to share their experiences. "David," said Margaret, "I think you've opened a Pandora's box." "Maybe so, Margaret, but it was a box that needed to be opened." One of the calls was particularly impactful. A woman from Richmond said her son had been treated by Dr. Victor Vance 6 months prior and was misdiagnosed with a serious illness. The young man underwent 3 months of unnecessary treatments before another doctor discovered the error. "Ma'am," David said on the phone, "does your son's family have all the documents from this case?" "Yes, we do. We even sued the hospital, but Dr. Vance was no longer there by the time we found out about the mistake." "Can you send copies of those documents to Dr. Christopher at the municipal hospital here in Savannah?" "Yes, I can. Anything to help stop this man." Similar cases kept coming in throughout the day. David understood that Dr. Vance had left a trail of victims much larger than they had initially imagined. In the afternoon, he went to meet Chloe so they could go together to the exhumation of her Henry. She was visibly nervous but determined. "How are you feeling?" asked David. "Scared, but determined. I feel I owe this to Henry." The cemetery was busier than usual. Besides the exhumation team, representatives from the district attorney's office, the State Medical Ethics Board, and several journalists were present. Mrs. Alice and Sarah arrived accompanied by their lawyer and some relatives. When they saw Chloe, Mrs. Alice hugged her as if she were a daughter. "My dear, thank you for being here." "It's the least I can do, Mrs. Alice." The exhumation process was conducted with great care and respect. Chloe held firmly onto David's hand throughout the entire procedure, but did not step away. When Henry's coffin was opened, the medical examiner conducted a series of preliminary examinations. His expression grew increasingly serious as the analysis progressed. "Doctor," asked Sarah, "can you tell us anything yet?" "It's premature to make any definitive statements, but I can say there are indications that Mr. Henry still showed signs of life at the time he was declared deceased." The confirmation left the whole family emotional. Mrs. Alice cried, but also showed relief at knowing her suspicions were correct. "Does this mean Dad might have suffered like Chloe suffered?" asked Sarah. "We'll know more for certain after the full lab tests. But yes, it's a real possibility." Chloe approached Henry's coffin and said a silent prayer. David saw tears streaming down her face. "Chloe, do you want to leave?" "Not yet. I want to stay until the end." The medical examiner collected all necessary samples and recommended the body be prepared for a new burial. "The test results will be ready in a week," he informed them. "But based on the initial analysis, there are strong indications of error in the original diagnosis." Mrs. Alice held Chloe's hand. "My child, now I know my Henry wasn't alone. You two helped each other even without knowing." "What do you mean, Mrs. Alice?" "You survived to tell his story, and he gave you the strength not to give up down there." Mrs. Alice's words deeply moved Chloe and David. There was a spiritual connection between the two victims that transcended the tragic circumstances. As they left the cemetery, they were approached by reporters. Chloe hesitated for a moment, then addressed them. "I am Chloe Sterling. I was one of Dr. Victor Vance's victims, and I want to say publicly that I will not rest until he is held accountable for what he did to me and to others." Chloe's public statement was a turning point in the case. David saw a transformation in her, from a traumatized victim to an activist determined to seek justice. The reporters asked several questions, and Chloe answered with courage and clarity. She recounted her experience without going into morbid details, focusing on the importance of protecting other patients. "Chloe," asked one of the journalists, "does your family support this public exposure of the case?" Chloe hesitated for only a second. "My family is worried about me, and I understand that. But some things are more important than personal concerns. Patient safety is one of them." David was proud of Chloe's mature response. She had found a way to respect her family's position without abandoning her principles. After the interviews, Chloe looked exhausted but relieved. "How are you feeling?" asked David. "Better. Speaking publicly about the case was difficult but necessary. Now I feel like I'm actually doing something to help other people." "And your mother, how do you think she'll react?" "She'll be angry, very angry, but I needed to do this." David accompanied Chloe back to the family's apartment. As expected, Mrs. Eleanor was furious. "Chloe, how could you talk to reporters without consulting me?" she shouted as soon as Chloe walked in. "Mother, I have the right to speak about my own experience. You don't have the right to harm our family and our business." "I didn't harm anyone. I just told the truth." Mr. Hawthorne, the lawyer, was present and tried to mediate the discussion. "Chloe, Mrs. Sterling, let's all try to stay calm. What's done is done. Now we need to deal with the consequences." "What consequences?" asked Chloe. "Well, now that the case has become public, we have less control over how it develops. Other lawyers may try to take advantage of the situation. Other families may file parallel lawsuits." "And is that a bad thing?" interrupted David. "If other families were harmed, don't they have a right to justice?" Mr. Hawthorne looked at him with irritation. "Mr. David, you don't understand the legal complexities involved." "Maybe not, but I understand right and wrong." Mrs. Sterling turned to David with a hostile expression. "Mr. David, you did admirable work saving my daughter, but now you are interfering in matters that are not your concern." "Mrs. Sterling, with all due respect, but when you decide to protect a negligent doctor to avoid scandal, it becomes the concern of any citizen." "I am not protecting any doctor. I am protecting my family. And I am protecting other families who may be going through the same situation." Chloe stepped between her mother and David. "Enough! Stop this argument." "Mother, Mr. David saved me. And not just physically. He gave me the courage to face this situation." "Chloe, you don't need to face anything. Our lawyers can handle everything discreetly." "Mother, discreetly doesn't work when it's about a doctor who might be doing this to other people. Discreetly means other families will suffer while we protect our image." Hannah, who had been following the discussion in silence, decided to support her sister. "Mother, Chloe is right. We can't stay silent, knowing other people might be at risk." "Hannah, you don't understand either. You're both too young to grasp the implications of all this." "Mother," said Chloe firmly, "I spent 3 days buried alive. If that doesn't give me the maturity to understand the implications of things, I don't know what would." The comment left Mrs. Eleanor in silence for a few seconds. David saw that for the first time she seemed to genuinely consider her daughter's point of view. "Chloe," she said, her voice softer, "I know you went through something terrible, and I know you want to do what's right, but I'm afraid all this exposure will end up hurting you even more." "Mom, staying silent hurts me too. It makes me feel like I'm an accomplice to something wrong." David decided it was time to excuse himself and let the family resolve their internal matters. "Folks, I'll let you talk. Chloe, if you need anything, you know where to find me." "Thank you, Mr. David, for everything." David left the apartment with the feeling that Chloe had grown a lot during that conversation. She was becoming a woman determined to make a difference. At home, Margaret was waiting for him with more news about the case. "David, 5 more families called today, all with suspicious cases involving Dr. Victor Vance." "5 families? This is getting too big, Margaret." "And there's more. A lawyer specializing in medical malpractice called offering free help to all the victims." "What lawyer?" "Mr. Thomas Sterling. He said he's worked on similar cases before and wants to form a united front to sue Dr. Vance and the hospitals that hired him." The information energized David. If there was a specialized lawyer willing to work for free, the low-income families would have a better chance at obtaining justice. Did you get his number? I did, and I scheduled a meeting for tomorrow with all the families who have been in touch. David hugged Margaret, grateful for the support she was giving to the investigation. Margaret, are you sure you want to get this involved? It could bring trouble for our family. David, if it were our granddaughter who had gone through what Chloe went through, I would want someone to fight for her. So we're going to fight for all these families. Margaret's solidarity touched David deeply. He understood that the investigation had become a cause for his entire family. The next morning, David's house was transformed into a coordination center for the families victimized by Dr. Vance. Mrs. Alice and Sarah arrived early, followed by representatives from 6 other families who had been in contact. Mr. Thomas Sterling arrived with a briefcase full of documents and impressive experience in medical malpractice cases. Everyone, he said. From what I've been able to ascertain so far, Dr. Victor Vance has left a trail of at least 15 suspicious cases in 5 different states over the last 3 years. The information shocked everyone present. 15 cases, repeated Mrs. Alice. How was that possible? Simple, replied Mr. Thomas. He changed cities and hospitals whenever suspicions began to arise, and since the cases were spread out, no one could see the complete pattern. And now? How will we proceed? Asked Sarah. We will file a class action lawsuit against Dr. Vance and against all the hospitals that hired him knowing his problematic history. We will also pressure the State Medical Ethics Board for a broader investigation. One of the families present was from Chicago. Mrs. Gladys had lost her husband under circumstances very similar to those of her Henry, 8 months prior. Mr. Thomas, she said, my husband was cremated the next day. We have no way to prove anything. Mrs. Gladys, the rapid cremation is suspicious in itself, and we have the medical records which can show inconsistencies in the diagnosis. David was impressed with Mr. Thomas's organization and knowledge. Finally, there was someone with the technical competence to tackle the situation legally. Mr. Thomas, asked David, what about the family's safety? Dr. Vance is still missing. On that, I have news. The court has ordered his preventive detention. He is considered a fugitive and is being sought nationwide. The news brought relief to everyone. At least Dr. Victor could no longer see patients while being sought by the law. Chloe arrived in the middle of the meeting, accompanied by Hannah. She greeted all the families present and showed herself determined to help in whatever was necessary. Mr. Thomas, she said, I want to be the key witness in this case. I am willing to speak in any court about what I went through. Chloe, this is very important. Your testimony is the strongest we have because you survived and can recount in detail what happened. Then you can count on me. Mrs. Alice approached Chloe and hugged her. My dear, you are an angel in the lives of all our families. Mrs. Alice, we are together in this fight, all of us. The meeting lasted all morning. When it ended, all the families were organized, with a clear legal plan and the determination to see justice done. David felt fulfilled seeing how his discovery at the cemetery had turned into a major mobilization for justice, but he also knew the fight was only beginning. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out, now continuing. In the following days, the case gained national attention. Television programs began covering the topic of medical errors, and Chloe was invited to give several interviews. In one of them, she gave a moving testimony that touched millions of viewers. I want to say to all families who lost loved ones under suspicious circumstances, you are not alone, and you have the right to question, to investigate, to demand answers. Chloe's words inspired many other families to seek out Mr. Thomas and David to report suspicious cases. The number of potential victims of Dr. Victor reached 23. Mrs. Eleanor, initially furious about the public exposure, began to change her mind when she saw the positive impact her daughter's stance was having. Chloe, she said in a private conversation, I am proud of you. Really, Mom, really. I was wrong to want to cover up the case. You are doing the right thing. Thank you for understanding, Mom. And Mr. David, continued Mrs. Eleanor, I want to apologize for how I treated you. You not only saved my daughter physically, but also inspired her to be a better person." David was moved by the apology. "Mrs. Eleanor, there's no need to apologize. We were all trying to protect those we love." "But you were protecting people you didn't even know. That is much nobler." The reconciliation with the Sterling family strengthened the fight for justice even further. Now they had the full support of an influential family in the city. 2 weeks later, Dr. Victor Vance was arrested in a small town in Georgia. He was using false documents and trying to get a job at another hospital. "David," called Mr. Thomas. "They arrested Dr. Victor. He will face charges for negligent homicide, illegal practice of medicine, and falsification of records." "And the families? How are they reacting?" "With relief. They finally know he can't harm anyone anymore." The arrest of Dr. Victor marked the beginning of a new phase of the case. Now it was time to fight for conviction and compensation for the families. During the legal process, which lasted almost a year, Chloe became a nationally recognized activist in the field of patient rights. She created an organization to help families victimized by medical errors and earned a law degree with a specialization in public health. David continued working at the cemetery, but also became a respected consultant in cases of exhumations and post-mortem investigations. His experience with Chloe's case made him a reference in the field. Dr. Victor Vance was sentenced to 15 years in prison and had his medical license permanently revoked. The hospitals that hired him, knowing his troubled history, paid multi-million-dollar compensations to the victims' families. Mrs. Alice Thompson used her compensation to create a foundation in memory of her husband, offering free legal support for low-income families victimized by medical errors. Chloe married a few years later to a young doctor she met during her activism work. They have 2 children and work together on projects to improve hospital quality. Hannah became an investigative journalist, specializing in exposing irregularities in the healthcare field. Her first major story was precisely about her sister's case, which earned several journalism awards. David and Margaret became honorary godparents to Chloe and are considered family by the Sterlings. They participate in all family celebrations and are consulted on important decisions related to the Victim Assistance Foundation. Mr. Thomas Sterling opened an office specializing in medical errors and works in partnership with the organizations created by Chloe and Mrs. Alice. He never charges low-income families and has already helped over 100 families obtain justice. The case of Chloe Sterling transformed United States legislation on hospital safety. New protocols for death confirmation and monitoring systems for doctors with problematic histories were created. 5 years after the events, Chloe organized a gathering of all the families involved in the case. It was an emotional meeting where they could celebrate not only the justice obtained, but also the positive transformation their struggles brought to the entire healthcare system. "Mr. David," said Chloe during the gathering, "you saved much more than my life that night at the cemetery." "How so, Chloe?" "You saved the lives of hundreds of people who will never again be victims of doctors like Dr. Vance, because now there are systems to prevent it." David was moved by Chloe's words. He truly had done much more than he imagined when he heard the first knocks from the grave. "Chloe, I only did what anyone should do. I listened when someone called for help." "Exactly," she replied, "and you taught all of us to do the same." The gathering ended with all those present planting a tree in the cemetery where it all began. It was a symbol of life born from the experience of near tragedy. The plaque placed at the foot of the tree read, "In memory of all victims of medical errors and in honor of those who fought for justice, may no family ever suffer in silence again." Chloe grew to become one of the leading patient rights activists in the United States. Her traumatic experience was transformed into strength to protect others and improve the country's healthcare system. David continued to be the most respected gravedigger in the city, but now he was also known as the man who saved Chloe Sterling and changed the lives of hundreds of families. He had never been prouder of his work as he was after that night at the cemetery. The story of Chloe and David proved that sometimes heroes emerge from the most unexpected places, and that an ordinary person can make an extraordinary difference when they decide to do what is right, no matter the cost. And every time David passed by the grave where he found Chloe, He remembered that the most important thing in life is to always be willing to listen when someone calls for help, no matter how unlikely the plea may seem. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this moving story. Do you believe cases like this can happen in real life? If you have any similar experience to share, leave it in the comments with sincere words. What would you do in David's place and in Chloe's place? We would love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories like this one.